Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you came to another one of our artist talks this semester. I'm proud to introduce our own Ron Mazellan, who will be giving a talk tonight in connection with his exhibition, which is out in our Williams Galleries. I know that many of you already are familiar with Ron, but if you're not familiar, he's been a very long-standing faculty member here at Indiana Wesleyan. He's had a very illustrious illustration career. He did an MFA at the University of Hartford. He's won numerous awards for his illustration work. He has won so many accolades for illustration and teaching. We're really privileged to have him giving us a retrospective exhibition and talking to us a bit tonight about his career. So please give him a warm round of applause.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, first good start. Well, whenever you see the word retrospect, you get the idea that someone's either has done a lot of work or they're really old. And so tonight we're just going to talk about the old part, and maybe you'll get a little bit of some background about the art. When you start an experience of doing anything, you don't really know the outcome of that experience when you say yes to it. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of background as to some of the yeses that helped steer my life. And so when I think back and I look at this picture of, and I'm sure you could probably find me somewhere in this shot, but I grew up in New Jersey on the East Coast, and I was one of 9 kids. I was raised in a really devout Roman Catholic family. I'm a son of a father who was in the military. I'm the grandson of my grandfather, who was a police officer. And so there's a lot of discipline in the way that I was raised. And discipline was the way that my folks showed love. And it didn't feel that way many times when you didn't listen to what they were saying. But I found that there was a place in our house that I could find solitude. And so I started just investigating drawing, and I began doing this to have some sense of being alone and being out of the noise of a very loud family. And so growing up in a family like this, everything was about whatever you wanted, you had to either yell for it or fight for it. And so having that experience growing up, I started to realize I wanted to create some separation from what I felt wasn't a very strong and helpful upbringing. So I started to get involved in sports, and then obviously got involved in art. And as I was journeying through junior high and going through high school, I had an exceptional art teacher who basically, by the time I was a senior, gave me some clarity about my life. And she asked me to say yes to going to art school. And she reminded me very clearly that sports are temporary and art is forever. And that statement was really transformative for me. That statement really caused a shift that happened in my life that I had no idea what that outcome was going to be. But it was a random comment, but probably well planned. It sounded random to me. So I went to an art school in New Jersey for 3 years, and I graduated from it. And upon graduation, a lot of the students that were in that art school went to New York, and that's where they began their careers. I had become a Christian a few years before that, and I just had this, I would just say this prompting from God's Holy Spirit that I would attend a Bible school. And to my folks, that was just the craziest idea that they have ever heard. I had gone through this experience, going through art school. It was a great experience, but I just felt compelled to go to Moody Bible Institute, downtown Chicago. My folks were so embarrassed about my decision, they would not tell friends where I was going to school. They said, "We don't know where Ron is." And it was a very, very difficult experience knowing that you vanished from the planet. And my folks could not wrap their minds around that. And it was really hard for me to actually wrap my mind around it, but I felt compelled. And so I went to Moody for 2 years, and it was basically as a response from what a friend told me, this would be transformative for your life. I didn't know if this would be the wisest transformation, but I went and I said yes to it. During my last semester at Moody, it's a 3-year program, but at the end of 2 years, someone else introduced themselves to me and said, you know what, I think you should transfer to Wheaton College. Now, it's already 5 years after high school. And I'm going, okay, more school is not what I want. School was something I was trying to get out of since the 8th grade. And I still found myself in it. And I responded again with a yes. And so I went to Wheaton College, and during my experience at Wheaton, I had that tension of sports, because I played sports again at Wheaton, and art. And my teammates could not understand my passion and drive for art, because I was hitting people versus doing art, and they couldn't understand why I was doing that. So there was this real conflict. And while I was at Wheaton, I ended up working at a racquetball club. During that experience, I was dealing with Chicago businessmen and women who were trying to catch the train to downtown. And I found that if I opened up the racquetball club early, they got to have an extra half hour getting ready for the train. While I was getting to my last semester, this guy comes up to me and he says, Ron, you know, you graduated from Wheaton. What are you going to do? And I said, well, you know, you have that hesitation. You know what it's like when someone asks you, what are you going to do with your life? What's your big dream? Because that was his big question. And he said, what are you going to do? And he was really kind of forward about it. And his name was Roger Salisbury. And I said, well, I want to work for Disney. He goes, oh, wow, that's a big deal. That's a big dream. And I was so embarrassed. I go, why did I say that? But I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't qualified for it. I didn't know if I would be any good at it. And he says, well, my best friend's the art director in Burbank, California. And he says, if you pack up and move to California, I'll get the interview. And it was all about that yes again. I was scared out of my wits graduating from Wheaton. I had no idea what the next step was. I didn't even know how to take the next step. And now this is 7.5 years after high school. Really difficult. It's like suddenly you're going to step across the line to graduate, and you have no idea really what's next. But I said yes. One of the guys that I had played football together, he lived in Southern California. He said, why don't you stay with my family until if that job works out, great. If it doesn't, you know, what have you lost? So I ended up working as a graphic designer for the Disneyland Hotel. Amazing experience there. For 2 years, I worked with a guy who was an incredible art director who helped me to understand that art is business. And he helped me to get really serious about what art is all about. Helped me to understand this path, this journey, and what it was all about. So when I look at this picture, I have no idea what's next. So I began my freelance career in Southern California. And during that time, I worked specifically in 2 industries, advertising and entertainment. Those industries are driven by deadlines and driven by a lot of ego. Hopefully not mine, but the people that I worked with. Because so much was at stake every time you did a job. And I'm raising my family on this. And so suddenly things get real when you have kids involved. Suddenly the decision-making issues that you're making are all about these kids now. Because now you're generating a living off your mind and your hand. And suddenly I understood that art is no game. I mean, I love art, but I can't play with it like this is for fun, because I need to make a living. And I understood about the issue of competition and what that's all about. And when you start to understand what competition is all about, you realize there are some people that want to win. And some want to win in any way they can. I wanted to win because God called me to it, that He skilled me to do this. And He was going to introduce me into people's lives that I would have never imagined my lives being connected to. But it's unbelievable in the experience of doing this, the voices that run through your head. Because some of the thoughts that you have that run through your head, they can't possibly all be true. You lie to yourself all the time. You tell yourself that you're not very good at this, that you're not qualified, this will never be good for me. Those thoughts run through your head just as much as the thoughts of like, you know, it's really possible. I can make a living at this. So the guy on the screen right now, his name is Lon. And he became my father-in-law. The guy that I moved out with to California, lived with his family. I ended up marrying his sister. And a bizarre set of circumstances that had happened. But John's sister, Jill, left California to come to school in the Midwest. She wanted a brand new experience, wanted to live in the Midwest, and ended up here. She started out as a nursing major, ended up in the art program. She told me about how extraordinary the faculty were here and how transformative it was. I had no idea how these things were starting to link up. I had no idea about how these dots were actually going to match. But what I found through Lon was that when you married his daughter, he wants to make sure this is going to work. When you tell somebody, you're going to tell somebody that, you know what, I met this guy and he's an artist. Oh, how cute. You know, and you think about how neat it is to be married to an artist. Well, that will last for about 2 weeks. And suddenly you have a conversation with your father-in-law and he says, okay, how's this going to happen? Because you have kids and suddenly you get a wake-up call from your father-in-law that says, okay, we've got to build a strategy for this to happen. And so he convinced me to teach. He said, I think you've got all the qualities to teach. I had never been trained to be a teacher. Went through all those years of academic experience. It was all about trying to do art and make art happen, not make teaching happen. And he said, I see something in you, and you should experiment with teaching. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, why don't you start teaching? Well, how am I going to start teaching? I said, I'm not even going to be that good at it. I have no idea. He says, well, we need a Sunday school teacher. And I go, oh my gosh. You know, and he says, yeah, why don't you teach this class? 2 people. 2 people were in the class. And he goes, you really can't screw this up. And I go, well, I can do that with 2 people. Well, over the course of the next year, it grew to 3. And it ended right there. So I knew that, you know, I might have something, but I don't have much. But what he did during that time is that he really encouraged me to get my master's degree. So I enrolled at Cal State Fullerton while I was a full-time illustrator, and I enrolled in a program that was absolutely transformative. I said yes to an experience that just blew my mind. So for over 2 years, I worked on my master's degree while raising my boys, trying to be an extraordinary husband, and in moving my life forward with art. And that experience, that conversation was, again, another yes that changed my career. So what happens when your family becomes what it is, and then after you start to have this career, you feel God moving you in another direction? So after 10 years of doing the advertising entertainment business, I started to feel a sense that my art was only having a shelf life as long as an advertising campaign. So you pour your life into something that has a very short level of existence. So when you do advertising and entertainment, it's a blip on the screen and it doesn't last. So then I started to go to New York. Scared out of my wits, started showing my portfolio in person. This is before the internet. This is smoke signals, taking, you know, a car, driving or flying, no cell phones, actually asking people for directions. All of this and going to New York scared, doing it scared, but doing it anyway. I'm meeting with art directors and I started to have this desire to move into publishing. So I shifted my career and I was able to get an agent, which was, again, a big change. But when you're raising a family, you're finding ways to make this thing work. So we left California and we moved to Colorado. I had no real direction to move to Colorado other than the sense that it was pretty. I thought this will be very nice, be a big change. So we made this move to Colorado and began to rent a house there just to see what was next. And it was during that time I felt God moving again in my life. And I decided to call one of Jill's old teachers from Indiana Wesleyan. I called the division chair, who happened to be Ardelia Williams, and she said, well, there was an opening at Taylor University for an art prof. I said, well, I'm just going to throw this stone out there and see if it lands anywhere near the ocean. So I told her about this job at Taylor, and I just said, can you give me any kind of background about Taylor University? Do you know anything about it? Do you know anybody there? And I was just testing the water. And she said, it's interesting that you've called. And I said, well, why is that? I've been praying for you to come for over 2 years. I felt so lousy. I said, why did you tell me that? And I felt like, why are you telling me you've been praying for me? Because we would love to have you come. And I got off that phone quickly, and I told her, he says, well, after I got off the phone, I said, well, I appreciate that very much. And I got the coldest feet that you could possibly have. And I just said, well, thank you, and we'll talk soon. And I knew I was never going to call her back. And so, but it was so eerie. So for 48 hours, I had this incredible unrest. And I called her back and I said, you closed the door on me before I closed on you. I came out to Indiana Wesleyan. I was so arrogant because I didn't want the job. I do not want to come here. And so I got on the plane and I visited, and I said, I only have 1 day for this interview. And so all day long I met with people. Everyone that I met, it was just awesome. It was so great. And so I flew back to Colorado, and when my wife is nervous, she makes chocolate chip cookies. I come in the house, and there are stacks of these cookies on the kitchen counter. And I knew something was up. And Indiana Wesleyan takes their time hiring anybody. They vet, they take their time. And it was a pretty quick response. And they said, we'd love to have you come. And scared out of my wits, not knowing how this was going to go, I began a teaching career because I could live here and work in New York. And that's what I wanted. They provided so much affirmation, so much encouragement, to the point where I knew it wasn't possible for me to fail. And when you go with that type of confidence, it's not cockiness. It's knowing where your confidence comes from. Because you don't do art alone. You think you do. But art is collaboration all over it. So when you look at a sketch like this to the left, you'll see all these working lines going through the artwork. That's how I begin. I just start drawing. I get a feel for what I'm drawing. I have no idea what the outcome is going to be. Much like your life, you're going to start out and it's going to feel pretty sketchy. You have no clue how this is going to work. But I will tell you, you will never find out if you say no. Your yeses are filled with incredible power because you allow yourself to move your life forward. But if you say no, you stop it short. You'll never know the outcome. And it's a risk. But I feel God has called you to risk. He has called you to something that's unsafe. Because I have to trust him for the next thing. When I do a drawing, there are so many times when I'm under a deadline, I'm going, I am in over my head. Much like you feel probably right now with a few weeks to go. You don't know how you're going to make it. You could easily just pack your bags, leave in the middle of the night. Your roommate has no idea you left. And you could say, where did you go? I just have had it. Or you could listen to the voice in your head that says you'll never make it, so you might as well leave now. Because some of you, that voice is real. That voice is motivating. Because no one is going to care whether you go into art. You might have a shelf life of a few seconds where someone will say, hey, heard you're not going into art. Yeah, what are you doing for lunch? That's about how long it's going to last. Sorry, you're not going to do art. They're not going to care. You could either invest into this thing or bury it. That's how it's going to be. There's no middle. I would love to give you a middle, like gray, but you're either going to bury this thing or you're going to pour your life into it. So I look at that and I look at this. This is my granddaughter's artwork that I found on my desk. On my drawing table, I came back from a weekend. On my drawing table is this little drawing. Now, I didn't tell, her name is Ruby. I said, Ruby, where's the light? There's no light on this thing. In fact, the anatomy is really off. You have one eye larger than the next, and you're not showing motion. It's all hard line, and it's flat. If I told her that, she goes, well, I'll do it again. Or she'll be crushed by those words. You know, I don't think you should go into drawing. You know, how many voices have you heard? Okay, what's plan B? They want you. They want plan B. Everybody wants plan B. You want plan B. But if you have a hard plan A, man, the reason why I only had a plan A is I couldn't do anything else. I thought, man, if I can't draw, you know, what am I going to do? And so it came to that point for me that the plan B had to be extinguished. But I do believe that God can have a couple plan A's for you. I mean, there are other plan A's. I feel like I was called to teach. That's a plan A. I had no idea that was coming. Illustration is a plan A for me. And so when I look at a granddaughter's drawing, I know that there's potential for it. I know this is not as good as Ruby's going to get. You know, I know there's something more to it. But I look at this and I go, what an imagination this kid has. You know, I love this idea of this airborne angel or this happy kid. You know, it's just really cool looking to look at. And it's done because there's joy in it. So my life is really weird. And I have, I was about to say I had a weird wife. I don't have a weird wife. I have a really great wife. But she does a weird thing. She is a service dog trainer. Now, I have learned so much alongside my art in what she does. And essentially, as a side note, she's teaching this dog not to move. Okay, so we live near Marion General Hospital, not too far from a helipad. Okay, so this dog is being trained to stay stationary under loud sounds, bizarre movement, and this dog's not going to move until a few leaves pass by. But the dog is staying right where he's supposed to stay, not moving, not doing anything else but what he's been told to do. My wife's not even looking at the dog. The dog is under command, chasing that leaf. And then the helicopter takes off. The dog's just looking at her and just totally focused. Now, dog training and art, there's a lot of similarities. Art, dog training, there's a lot of poop. I mean, you are going to clean up a lot of messes. There's going to be things that people are going to do that are going to be really messy for you, and you're going to go, I don't want to clean this up. Well, if you don't do that with dogs, it just doesn't go away. And we love doing that when there's that kind of thing in our life, we want to avoid it. And it just piles up, and it's a mess if you don't take care of it. It's also dog training and art, it's absolutely inconvenient to do. You're never going to feel like, man, Saturday, I got all day. You know, and you want that, but you get interruptions, something happens, something crashes, something doesn't happen or whatever, and you feel like I can crowd all my art into one day. Well, art is never done in one day. Art is like farming. You plant, you got to wait for this thing to grow, and then at some point is harvest. But when transformation. When my wife takes one of these dogs to a family, they never know what it took to get that dog ready. Much like when you do a drawing, a painting, anything that you create, nobody has a clue about the hours you have poured over a piece of artwork. They're going to look at it and they're going to go, great, love this dog, love this art. And sometimes that's all anybody can say or do. But if you love it, you could care less whether they recognize that or not. So our house looks like this. All right, this is my son Evan laying on the ground. These puppies are all in what's called a place. They're all in a spot where they need to learn to love boredom. Weird for a dog, you know? And you are experiencing the same thing. There are times you're working on a job, you feel like you might be bored with it, and somehow you've got to make it exciting again. Art is hard work, much like this. There's so many things that are happening under the current that you don't realize the payoff yet. But if you quit too soon, you'll never find out what that payoff is. So because my life is surrounded by these animals, I've been encouraged by my agent to say, you know what? I want you to do a children's book about your wife. I go, whoa, my wife. What she does for a living. I want you to write a book about service dogs. So I'm writing a manuscript about a dog named Stella. So this is my first little drawing about this dog and about the experience of this dog and the transformation that this dog makes in a person's life. And as I work on it, it lives right next to me all the time. This experience is all around me. In some ways, I can't miss it. I really believe in God's providence. You cannot miss what God has for you if you keep your life in front of Him. It's like already the game is over. All that you have to do is step into it and do the hard work to create the outcome that God imagines for you. Dallas Willard has this amazing quote that I've locked into. He says, whenever you invite God into anything, you get to see and experience the results that are not of you. You don't have to bear this thing all by yourself. You think you do, but you're not smart enough. I'm not trying to be demeaning, but you're not smart enough to handle all the stuff this life is going to throw at you. Because as much as you want to work for famous people and big organizations and big campaigns, they're wonderful in name, but they are better when they are done. Because big clients, big jobs, all have big demands. And sometimes they can be really trouble. They can be big trouble in your life. So when I look at the wall, the work that's been done, suddenly I get clarity. When I go and I look at that exhibit and I look at that artwork, I'm proud of it, but I also wanted something more from it. What I have found is that art cannot complete you. It is going to disappoint you. It is going to bring hope. It's going to be good. I'm not saying it's bad. But if you're looking at this to give you that sense like my life is now complete because I've had a New York Times bestseller, I have my work in CA magazine, I've been acknowledged by X amount of people. Well, that is nice for a moment, but it's not sustainable. Your art will never complete you. Prof. Lowe is teaching a class, History of American Illustration. And one of the things that class teaches you, that there are plenty of people that are famous that you study that are not known. It seems like a crazy contradiction. They were crazy famous for a brief amount of time, but nobody remembers them now. A few folks might surface in your minds, but you'll realize if you're living for a paragraph in a history book, you'll never ever experience the joy of that. And hardly anybody will care after they read that paragraph. I think your life when it's lived in a way that contributes to the lives of other people, your life has value. The value of being an illustrator is that you get to collaborate. You get to share your life with other people, and you get to exchange your good idea for somebody else's good idea for the greater good of a project. You give it away. And that's what I love about illustration. Not so much that it's commercial, so much so that it's collaborative. That you get to invest your lives into the other people and not just your artwork. Just your artwork, man, it's paper thin. It takes one little match. It takes one little misplaced, where did I put this artwork? Until it's gone. But as I said, you don't do this alone. I am surrounded by extraordinary people. The art faculty, I have felt in the last 27 years, I have experienced something far greater than I would have ever imagined. I would have never found my yes to be this impactful, to surround my life with such great people. And I would be amiss. I would miss it if I didn't acknowledge my wife, because she hears all the grumbling. Am I any good? You know, just finish the job. You know, I can't make it. Get some sleep. You know, whatever that means. I mean, she's the one that breathes life, you know, when I feel like I can't get it anymore. And it's an obvious no-brainer that God speaks through her. And that's what makes it. Because I've got that kind of support. And anytime when you think about a relationship, that person has to figure it out what you're about. Because you cannot do it all in your head. You need voices. And if you can't get those voices, find one that's going to support the vision. So I just really want to thank Prof. Hall, Lily, for setting up that exhibit, and the IW faculty, art faculty here. I just am so grateful for what you guys have done to set this up. So thank you for coming. Thank you for spending your time and sharing your life in this room. That's it. Appreciate you guys. Any questions? Any questions that I could help answer? Just don't make them hard. Inside, you know what I'm saying? Please, no question, no question. But I would hope that you would ask something. Go ahead, Cam. Make up something. Good question. Okay, that's okay. Yes, M. Do I have a favorite dog? The ones that we have are always the favorites. I mean, they are just, yeah, we've got some really cool dogs right now. And so they're about to graduate. They don't wear cap and gowns when they graduate, but yeah, they're really pretty cool. We have one, actually, if I pick one out, they would be offended that they didn't get picked. So, oh, I know, they would be. So yeah, I just love the ones that we have right now. Yeah. No. We don't do, she looks at doing art, even though she graduated with an art degree, her creative process is so different than mine. She does art so differently. She does it three-dimensionally. She does it with our house. She does it with the raising of our kids. She was so incredibly creative raising the boys. We didn't watch a whole lot of TV with them. I mean, we watched movies every once in a while and stuff, but she gave the kids a video camera so they made movies. And they got used to making movies. Then we found out that they would make bizarre movies where they would stuff one of my kids, the sons, into a suitcase and film him going down the steps in the suitcase. So she was creative that way, but we didn't know our boys would be that creative in other ways. So yeah, good question. Yeah.
Where can we get the book when it's complete?
Oh yeah, Speaking of the book, I need to work on it. So yeah. It is the next project, but I need a deadline. So.
And then Henrik asks, do you have any advice on how to stay alive creatively over the course of an entire career?
Yeah. I think the idea of voices, getting people to kind of remind you of what the bigger purpose is. I'm not trying to make the dog analogy any bigger than my art analogy, but you have no idea how big the story really is when you're in the story. There's always something more than what it is. When I read scripture, I could have read it 5 or 6 times, and suddenly it becomes more alive. I think that's what happens in your career. As you step into it, you realize that there's a much bigger story. So the one thing that I would just say in relationship to that question is that you want to be really careful about who you surround your life with. And because the people that surround you, you respond to them. You can mirror them. And you can mirror them poorly, or you can mirror them in a really positive manner. So I'm really careful about who I hang out with. So yeah, so I was going to say the dogs again, but I'm not going to say it. So any other questions?
From Andrew, you talked about the paragraphs in the history book moments being fleeting. What kind of winds kept you going and kept you developing along the way?
I look at every project, and I talk about this in senior portfolio, that it's just an incremental piece into the long view of things. And so I try not to let any one particular piece of artwork, like even picking those, I know that I have some others that I might have picked, but I just happen to have the frames and I put them in there. And I just appreciate Lily, the way that she installed them. But I just look at doing things incrementally instead of big story, knowing that everything's in layers, the way that I see it. Okay, great, good. All right, thank you again. All right.